This video is going to be a little bit unusual in that it is actually a tribute to my dad, who is really responsible for getting me into a lot of the first music that I started listening to, a lot of the music that we listened to around the house growing up. Were my dad's favorite artists. I remember we had a closet in our house, and on the top shelf, he kept all of his vinyl, and I was just tall enough to reach it, and so I could go through and pull different albums out and just kind of look at the artwork, and some of them had gatefolds. When he would play some of his albums, they had lyric sheets, so I would sit on the couch while the album was playing, and I would read through the lyrics and just kind of take in the music. So he would have been 73 this month. His birthday was in December. And unfortunately, he passed away when I was 15 years old. So some of the album selections here are albums that I distinctly remember listening to when I was growing up. Most of them are albums that I still listen to today. And then some of the albums are ones that kind of got me through a difficult time. He passed away when I was in high school, so I was 15 years old. And so I didn't have a lot of time with my dad, maybe more than most people did, but just enough to really get his flavor for what his musical tastes were, and to sort of develop and refine my own musical tastes, I guess is one way. So the first album that I remember hearing a lot growing up was Hot Rocks by the Rolling Stones. And I, to this day, am still a huge fan of the early Rolling Stones. I like the Rolling Stones 70s stuff. I mean, I'm a Rolling Stones fan through all their periods, but if you were to ask me what is your favorite music from the Rolling Stones, it would definitely be the stuff from the 60s. And this was the gatefold that came with it. And the songs that I really loved off this album, I loved Gimme Shelter, Brown Sugar was very cool off of here, Jumpin' Jack Flash. I mean, there's just so many great tracks on here. There's not a single dud. Every one of these tracks really would have made the career of any other artist. That's just how great they are. And I remember, looking at this back cover at the Rolling Stones and kind of their costumes or whatever they were dressed up as. Just looking at Charlie Watts just kind of standing there with his arms crossed, looking very menacing and dour, just kind of challenging you, to fight him, almost it felt like. But yeah, it's just, and what a thing to look at while you're listening to all that great music. The next album that I'm going to show, this is my dad's favorite band, or it was his favorite band. And it's interesting because his first name was Floyd. And I always thought, well, is it some kind of coincidence that he told me his favorite band was Pink Floyd? And I remember my uncle telling me stories about he and my dad, when this album came out, listening to this album in the dark over and over again, and just absorbing all the greatness, because they never heard anything like this before. I mean, there's really not a moment's silence until you get to the end of side one and you have to turn the record over. It's just one long track that doesn't have any breaks between the songs, which is really unusual when you think about it. But he really is responsible for me being such a Pink Floyd fan right now, because I didn't get into this album until I was really in high school, just because I wasn't into too much classic rock other than the Beatles growing up. And then when I got into high school, I started to branch out a little bit, and I remembered that this was one of the albums that was my dad's favorite. And so I thought, well, I got to give it a chance. So I bought the cassette of it in high school, and I remember driving around listening to it. I had a Sony Walkman at the time, and that was the way that I would listen to most of my cassettes. And just being like, wow, now I know. Like, I can't believe that it took me this long to rediscover this album, but it prompted me to start buying the rest of Pink Floyd's catalog. I bought Wish You Were Here, I got Animals, I got The Wall, I got Metal, and just got deeper and deeper into Pink Floyd. And I'm so glad I did. I don't think I know my dad didn't get as deeply into Pink Floyd as I did, because now I own pretty much everything by them, and I'm a huge Pink Floyd obsessive fan. They're definitely one of my top 5 bands, so I have him to thank for that. One of the albums that I remember him actually buying, bringing home, and then playing to death was this album. It was a live album by Harry Chapin, and he bought this before he passed away. He bought this, I believe, when it came out, and I think one of the reasons he got it was because this was, at the time, the only way you could get all of Harry Chapin's hits on one album. This is a double album, and it's got Cats in the Cradle, WOLD, Taxi, 10,000 Pounds of Bananas, I Want to Learn a Love Song, and Circle. And so I heard so much of Harry Chapin's music and got to appreciate so much of Harry Chapin's music just listening to this album alone. And it really does serve as the greatest hits collections. He performs them well, and there's no denying that he was a really gifted singer-songwriter, but I definitely would not have discovered that music on my own. I probably would have heard Cats in the Cradle or maybe Taxi on the radio, but I don't think I would have had the depth of appreciation that I do for Harry Chapin without that. My dad also was a huge Linda Ronstadt fan, and he had like 5 or 6 of her albums, and this is one that I just picked out. I have a few Linda Ronstadt, not all the ones that he had, but this one's got It's So Easy, which I remember him playing quite a bit. It's got a cover of the Roy Orbison track Blue Bayou, Poor Poor Pitiful Me. It's got a cover of the Rolling Stones' Tumbling Dice. So this definitely was one that was on my dad's turntable a lot growing up. And, you know, I've since grown to appreciate Linda Ronstadt's voice a lot more. The fact that, you know, Mike Nesmith wrote a song for her, different drum. She toured with the Eagles. So there's a lot of history there with her. And it was produced by Peter Asher. From Peter and Gordon, which I thought was pretty cool. But this is called the Simple Dreams album, and an iconic cover too. I remember staring at these album covers, just kind of wondering about the artist and, you know, just kind of what was going through their head while they were making the music. So when I was in high school, early high school, my dad got very ill, and he was in the hospital over Christmas of, I believe it was 1983, 82 or 83. I believe it was 82. And so we ended up having Christmas morning at our house without him. He was in the hospital, and one of the gifts that I got that year was Paul McCartney's Pipes of Peace. And, you know, I remember it being a very bittersweet Christmas because I was so excited. I remember Christmas Eve on MTV seeing the Pipes of Peace video where it's sort of like the World War I, and you've got the two sides, the British and the Germans are fighting, and then it's, from what I know, based on a true story. And then for one day, they had a truce. They played soccer together. They shared some of their food together. And then immediately there was like a 24-hour truce. And then at the end of that 24 hours, they started killing each other again. But I was so excited the next Christmas morning to find that I had gotten the Pipes of Peace album. And it was a very bittersweet Christmas because it was also the year I got my first guitar. It was a very cheap guitar. I never learned to play the guitar, but it was very cool. I remember it was red, and, you know, it was very tiny. I'm sure today I'd be surprised at how small it was. But, and also just kind of listening to this album, and, you know, it was a very bittersweet Christmas because, well, it's Christmas, we were supposed to be excited, but, you know, at the same time, it was not one of the greatest Christmases for me. But this was the album that I listened to during that period of time. And it was just something that, you know, kind of, it was some self-soothing there, putting this album on. You know, my favorite tracks on here were probably The Average Person. It's got kind of a rollicking, it's a tale about just different interesting people that I guess Paul McCartney had met. The title track was great. Say, Say, Say was the big single off it at this time, or at that time. Keep Undercover, I thought was a great Paul track. I still enjoy that one. But it's very much a poppier Paul than I think I had heard up to that point, because I had a lot of, my dad had the Wings, Venus and Mars album, and I had heard London Town. I think somebody had given me that album. I was familiar with Band on the Run. So this was a little bit more contemporary sounding Paul, but, you know, it's still, I got an affection for this album for that reason. And then, you know, when my dad did pass away, it was in 1985, and I remember getting to go to the record store shortly before that happened and getting to pick out an album. And that was when Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms had come out, and I went and I was like, oh, do I get it on cassette or do I get it on album? I ended up getting it on vinyl. And I still, this album takes me back to those times when I was just kind of struggling through losing my dad, and you know, obviously all the emotions that surround that. I would just play this beginning to end, and it really, you know, in as much as an album can get you through a period of time, this and Tears for Fears, Songs from the Big Chair, which also came out right around that time, were the two albums for me that I just kind of listened to and you know, tried to kind of cope with what I was going through at that time. And this is why it's probably one of my favorite albums to this day. So I didn't want to make this video too long, but I just wanted to kind of share, you know, doing that video about my musical memories had kind of taken me back a little bit. It was just sort of coincidental that this also happened to be the month of my dad's birthday. So I just thought I would share that. It's a little bit vinyl related. And so anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope everybody's doing well.